important choice to make. Will we go back to the failed policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward?
You just cannot trust Justin Trudeau. He will say anything to cover up his scandals, and he'll say anything to get reelected, and Canadians cannot believe the things that he says.
So this election comes down to a really clear question. Who can you count on to fight for you?
Our agenda is big. It is human rights. It's also social justice. It is universal pharmacare. It is child care. It is making sure that our students don't have to pay tuition anymore.
And I'm saying to Canadians during this campaign that if they want a real change, we are the party for a real change in this country.
Day one of 40. Party leaders made their first official pitches to voters today, as you just heard, but over each one of them hangs an issue that could hobble their races. The SNC-Lavalin controversy is back in the news. Questions about the leaders' personal stances on social issues continues to swirl, and Quebec's secularism law seems to be especially tricky for any party trying to pick up seats there. The next 40 campaign days determine who Canadians want to lead them, so what will influence that choice? Will this campaign change minds? Time for the Power Panel to answer all of those questions. In Toronto, Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance. Here with me in studio, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, Earnscliffe Strategy Group's Kathleen Monk, Marie Vastel of Le Devoir, and host of CBC Radio's The House, Chris Hall. It's not like I've said it 500 times, sorry. I also want to give a quick shout out to our viewers online on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're taking your questions about the election in the next segment of the Power Panel. So please ask away, and we're going to try and get to as many as we can. Mr. All, I'll start with you.
We're talking about Quebec, right? So Mr. All, that makes sense.
Yeah, Mr. All, exactly. That wasn't just a mess up. It was deliberate on my part. What stood out for you? This is an incredibly interesting campaign out of the starting gates. It is so close that this one really matters.
Yeah, I was struck by how much the past came in. Obviously, Justin Trudeau running on his past record of the past 4 years, but referring to the Harper Conservatives. Never mentioned Andrew Scheer by name once. And I thought that was really interesting in trying to frame the position as if you won't elect us, you end up with the Harper Conservatives back again. On the flip side, both Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May really were policy heavy, really rolling out the issues in which they believe that voters care about. We may hear a lot about pocketbook issues, but for them, it's more about the quality of life and what we can do through a national pharmacare program and those types of things. So really clear lines drawn on the first day, even though I thought a lot of the tension was kind of on the past when we're talking about choosing forward.
Kathleen, what stood out to you?
You know what I picked up? It was actually happened late last night when the Globe broke that story about the RCMP being kind of stymied in their attempts to investigate more so whether there was wrongdoing. It's interesting that battle that's being set up between who's going to set the agenda. Is it going to be the media who's going to set the agenda, driving particular stories, or is it going to be those poor workers in the back rooms that have been working so hard on those speeches and to develop that beautiful podium art? You know, they've been working for weeks and they wanted to have a clean launch and they were kind of thrown off by your colleague, Bob Fife. I think that, that put aside the launch and the stagecraft that happens on all of these kind of things. I think that what was significant was that we just have so many interesting party leaders getting out there today and how different their viewpoints were. You saw two party leaders surround themselves by people, that being Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. We saw Andrew Scheer standing alone, kind of with a vast, watery background and a foggy background, not sure where he was going. And actually, frankly, Maxime Bernier looking a little sad in Etobicoke.
There was, Amanda, let me pick up on the point that Kathleen makes around the contrast between especially the Liberals and the Conservatives, because it was very evident. I mean, everyone says don't look at the polls, except for the polls have them tied, and you could hear that in each of their speeches. I mean, one was Mr. Trudeau was condemning Conservatives writ large, as Chris says, not specifically naming Andrew Scheer, but calling out Mr. Harper. And Mr. Scheer was very pointed in his criticism of the integrity of Mr. Trudeau. And what he said was, basically trying to advocate that he was the only one that could put more money back in people's pockets. What did you think of the contrast between the two parties that was established right out of the starting gate?
Well, I think it was somewhat unsurprising because we've seen a big ramp up and lead up to the campaign. So from Trudeau's standpoint, putting forward the progress that's been made, talking a lot about, a strong economy and more jobs and lifting more children out of poverty, really trying to set the agenda to be, listen, we're moving forward together. if you make another choice, you're making a choice backward. And the reason why he's referencing Harper is because that's the backward that people remember, back to policies that people chose to get away from in 2015. I thought it was also interesting. I agree with Kathleen that they chose to stand in front of a group of people, what they called like ordinary Canadians, families that I think if people were watching, they could say, yeah, it's kind of like me. I'm like the student, or I'm like the parent with 2 kids, or whatever it might be. So trying to illustrate that there is a togetherness, that there's symbolism in having individuals stand behind you, and then taking that step from Ottawa and getting on a plane just like he did in 2015, flying across the country to Western Canada, to Vancouver, BC, which he called his second home, and really kicking off the campaign in Western Canada, which in and of itself was another signal.
Tim?
Well, the rent-a-crowd will be a common theme among all the leaders on a go-forward basis. But what was interesting for me, I think my colleagues have hit a number of key points, but if you're going to unseat an incumbent, and particularly this one who, despite the polls being tied, is still likely favored to win the election, you have to take risk and take opportunity when it's presented. So originally, the audience may not know this, Andrew Scheer wasn't going to speak until later in the morning. So he didn't start with his platform. He started with a very calculated attack based on the Globe story on Mr. Trudeau and what's apparently going on or not going on with the RCMP and the like. That had not been done, to the best of my recollection, in recent election launches in the past when there have been opportunities there. That forced the Prime Minister to respond. If Andrew Scheer is going to win, he has to show that he has the political smarts to do it. On the photo op, again, I don't know if this was deliberate or not, but one of the criticisms that the Liberals have effectively drawn about Mr. Scheer is he's not his own person. He's either Stephen Harper or he's Doug Ford or he's, whoever the Conservative villain populaire of the day is. So when you do stand alone, though, you do have the ability to create your own impression. There will be, as I say, lots of these rent-a-crowds. The rest of the day, I think, was entirely predictable. We heard what everybody was expected to say about where they were going to go, but the beginning of the day was interesting. Does it last? Does it have a benefit? I don't know, but that shows that Scheer's at least willing to take risks.
The other thing, Marie, that stood out to me was thanks to initially your line of questioning on Bill 21 and a number of leaders who were asked about that. We just did a panel of candidates. I found it remarkable how similar each party's position was, which is essentially, we are going to really stand up for minority rights, except for nobody is actually going to do anything in the courts. We're going to wait and see how everything goes in Quebec. Like identical party positions across the line.
Yeah, I actually thought Mr. Trudeau went a little further than
normal.
Yeah, in the past. So he had that position up to now, being very vague, saying we will always stand up for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we disagree with telling people what they should or should not wear. That was his typical line, but they never really said if they thought that they should get involved into a legal challenge, which they are already in Quebec. Today, Mr. Trudeau said he was very happy that citizens have taken this on and challenged this in court, and he said that it would be counterproductive to intervene for now. What I also found interesting was that Premier François Legault, Premier of Quebec, instantly, didn't even have to be asked, came out of his own cabinet meeting and said, and essentially urged all federal leaders to say they will not intervene. And he didn't mention Trudeau by name, but he said, and not for now, forever. So like directly.
Although Mr. McKinnon, who was here, was not as generous as Mr. Trudeau in saying maybe at one point we might. He was like, no, we're not intervening.
But Mark Miller on your show, Chris, this weekend on the House was pretty, he went pretty far by saying at some point or another, you will see the Prime Minister stand up for people's rights and federal jurisdiction and so on. So I thought it was interesting because I feel like Mr. Trudeau might be starting to feel he has to navigate two electorates. The bill is popular in Quebec. A majority of people do agree with it.
They all feel like they have to navigate it.
Yeah, because there are 78 seats in Quebec. Mr. Trudeau wants to win some seats in order to keep government. But on the other side, he had been criticized by columnists for the CBC, other English-speaking columnists, for not coming out strongly enough against Bill 21 in Quebec. And so I found it interesting that on day one of the election, he seemed to sort of go a bit further. I wondered if he was trying to reassure English voters on this issue.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Look, he's basically saying it's counterproductive at this moment, but I wonder what happens 5 weeks from now if he's returned to government. It may not be so counterproductive. I think he's infinitely relieved that Quebecers are taking this to court on their own and that he doesn't have to do it. But ultimately, these are the kinds of issues. When you talk about how first impressions are important and how important it is to get on the right foot, this is one that he was clearly struggling with in the same way Andrew Scheer was maybe given an advantage on the first day by this new report about the RCMP being concerned about having access to cabinet confidences and being stymied in a possible investigation into obstruction of justice.
Okay, I do have to take a commercial break, but we have more Power Panel after that break. And for those of you watching online, the live stream is going to continue in just a few seconds during that commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be answering your questions, so keep sending them our way and stay right there. Welcome back to Power and Politics and to the Power Panel with Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, Marie Vastel, and Chris Hall. We're taking some of your questions now as we stream on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Post your questions about the election in the comment section on all those platforms, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can over the next 10 minutes. I'm going to start off with, I'm probably going to mispronounce about 1,000 of these, but Karabi85 on YouTube asks, and this is a big question that we'll all be looking for throughout the campaign. Amanda, I'll start with you. What are the regions or ridings that are the battlegrounds to watch? Which ridings are the ones likely to decide the outcome on October 21st?
Oh, that's a good question. Regions to watch. I mean, Quebec's, everybody's going to be watching Quebec. Where do there's a lot of seats at play. Where do they go? The NDP has obviously lost some confidence in the province, which on day one may mean that there are more seats at play than originally anticipated. So I think everybody will be watching Quebec. I think that there are some really interesting ridings to watch. I don't know if they will be a signal per se, but if you look at Milton in Ontario, which is Lisa Raitt's riding, Liberal candidate Adam Van Couverden, so big like name power there, that's going to be a fight. But I think it'll say a lot if the deputy leader of the Conservative Party loses that seat. I think it may signal what's happening in Ontario. certainly in the Atlantic provinces, will the Conservatives pick up what we expect them to pick up? There's the independents who went independent, and everybody will be interested to see whether they can reclaim those seats. So there's a lot to watch, but I don't know if I would make a prediction that any one riding will be a signal that an election swang in a particular way.
I agree with Quebec. It's one to watch because the Bloc Québécois could very well, if there's a minority government, have the balance of power because they are picking up some support. I'm going to be watching two areas. Atlantic Canada, I know it's not a lot of seats, so only 32, but if the Liberals lose 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 seats there, that might be a bad omen for the way the rest of the country is going to go and how close this race might be in terms of a majority government. And I'm watching the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. I think that is really, ultimately, we always say, BC, it may come down to BC to decide, but I think this time it actually will.
Matt Wynot, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, on Facebook, Kathleen asks, what does Jagmeet Singh have to do to break through with the electorate and get them on his side?
I think he has to continue to push out his message, and it's going to be really hard because the party doesn't have the money to buy the ads like the other party, just to pound away, because campaigns really are about incremental messaging and preconditioning an audience over a long period of time, and the NDP is in a harder spot because they can't buy that message narrative, so they're going to have to earn it through earned media, through pushing out his performance. I think ultimately, though, Matt, that when people see Jagmeet, they really like him. When youth see him, they're very hopeful. They see him, they connect with him, they say, I see you, I can be that too, especially in urban areas and in more racialized, diverse communities. He's very hopeful, he's giving that hope to folks, and I think that actually when you connect with him, people will be voting for him and connect with his policies.
Yeah, I saw most or all of, I missed one of the news conferences today, and I thought he was the most authentic. I agree with Kathleen. If they show more of that, and Mr. Singh doesn't have trouble with the issues that he's had trouble with before because he's come across as unprepared, he might have a chance. Again, the expectations are so low for him, he has to find a way to channel that to his effect. I don't think
it worked for Trudeau last
I think they're much lower, though, for Mr. Singh.
Less means to do so.
But I think he has to be smart, too. I think the NDP will say there's probably 60 seats they have in play. I think he really should focus his efforts on those and show people that he can be a leader, and he may surprise, and that may mean that the obituary has been written prematurely.
A reminder, if you're watching us on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, keep your comments coming, your questions coming. We'll try to answer as much as possible. Sorry, I already asked that one. Never mind. Let's go for Jesus Fried Christ on Instagram. Asks, this is interesting, this is the Maxime Bernier question. What televised debates will Maxime Bernier be in? A lot of questions today I'm seeing from people online asking about whether or not just the debates, but sort of what kind of factor will Maxime Bernier be in this election, Marie?
Well, to answer the question, I don't think he'll be part of any televised debates. We're still waiting on the decision from the
Monday, I believe.
Debates Commission, but it seems not very likely that they would change their mind, and that is the challenge for Maxime Bernier because it's a smaller party. They have less money, they have less resources, they have less staff, and the issue also is that since he's running on his policy platform from the Conservative leadership, he doesn't really have much new announcements to make because he's kind of made them already. He's made headlines saying he wants to, abolish supply management, abolish all financing to companies like Bombardier, his immigration policies. And so it'll be hard for him to get headlines unless he gets himself into trouble, unfortunately, because we already know most of his positions on most issues.
Salon1020 on Instagram asks Chris, the West, and points to Alberta and Saskatchewan, doesn't really matter. Am I wrong?
Yes, you're wrong. The West does matter. Sorry. There's no other answer than that.
No, I think strategically, I'm saying.
Look, I think the Conservatives obviously are going to do very well in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and in Manitoba, the prairies, if that's, if we limit it to that. But the West has issues that do matter. Obviously, the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Obviously, the coastal environment of British Columbia. Jobs and opportunities in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are heavily dependent on the resource and energy sector. I think those issues do matter. The extent to which the parties actually visit is, I think, the more interesting question. Does Andrew Scheer need to stop there at all? Probably not, other than one or two early on in the campaign, because he's going to do very well there.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see. I just saw Amanda's picture come up. If Justin Trudeau spends much time out there, but we'll see.
What do you think, Amanda? Will he?
Well, again, I think that the signal that the very first place, the plane took off today after the announcement of Rideau Hall and went all the way across the country to kick off the campaign in BC. That's a big signal. Same thing he did in 2015. He called it a second home. And certainly that says to Western Canada, but it also says to the rest of Canada, matters so much that we're starting here. All of the other leaders stayed in Ontario and Quebec.
Vancouver is very different than Edmonton.
Well, and to be fair, they had to stay in Ontario because there's a debate.
Yeah, right.
Thursday.
He doesn't. He's not part of a debate.
Yeah.
So.
But math matters. Again, Chris made the point. Look, for the Liberals to maintain their majority, they have to pick up seats where they don't currently have them and protect some of the ones they're likely going to lose. They're not. Bold prediction. They're not going to get all 32 seats in Atlantic Canada.
yeah.
Probably lose 5 or 6 there. So where do they pick them up? Do they pick them up in Quebec?
Quebec.
If they don't pick them up in Quebec, what happens to Edmonton? Edmonton becomes very important. They have 2 seats there. They want to keep them. If they have a couple in Calgary, they're going to want to keep. So the West will matter in small pockets to the government because they'll want to defend what they have. And if they can't keep those seats and they're losing and they're not growing elsewhere, they have challenges.
Kathleen, Anthony Stats on YouTube asks, do you think Trump will have an effect on this election?
Well, I think about 18 months ago, or maybe a little less than that, we thought that Trump would be the boogeyman, but now really Ford has replaced him as the boogeyman, as the foil for the Liberals in this election. In fact, Ford was again invoked, or at least his slogan was invoked by Justin Trudeau today in his launch speech. So I think really, in any way, you'll see Trudeau use the ability that Liberal Party has had to actually negotiate and deal with Trump, as unpredictable as he has been, as a strength.
I guess we also don't know, though, what kind of decisions will happen during the election, or if there's some.
Oh, well, you never know.
You never know. But
tweets.
Based on now,
Tweets,
tweets, who knows?
Yeah, and another interesting point about Ford, and I've said this before, is that he may have been the worst thing to happen to Ontario and maybe the best thing to happen to the federal Liberals. They're certainly going to play off it. So we had talked about earlier, where did Trudeau start his speech today? And while he referenced Harper and the Harper Conservatives, he also made really clear references to Ford, because he said, conservatives will promise that they're there for the people, but really they're just there for the wealthiest while they cut services for everyone else. So he's already bringing that in. It's like day one of the election, he's already making that signal.
He was making that signal for the past 6 months. Since April, whatever the day the budget was dropped in April. Final question for you, Marie. Linda Tripp on Facebook asks, what effect do you think Elizabeth May will have on this election?
I think that's one that I'm definitely watching for. I'm intrigued by Elizabeth May. I think that people saying that this is an environment election, I would argue, are probably right. You've seen the Greens make gains in provinces. You've seen them come in third in Outremont in Montreal in a by-election, which would never have happened, like 2 years ago. And the environment keeps polling as the #1 issue. I think she will be important in this election in the sense of the main challenge that she represents. I don't know how that will actually translate in terms of actual ground game and seats. And is she going to, get 10 seats? Is she going to get 4 seats? Is she going to keep only 2 seats like she has now? I don't know how that anxiety for climate actually translates into votes. Is she just going to be the social conscience of this political campaign and make us all talk about it and force other parties to have a stronger platform? Or is she actually going to become the defender and the one who attracts that vote?
Can I just really quickly, she had a rough head into this election campaign, and I'm not sure that she's entirely comfortable or used to being a leader of a party that has to be taken seriously on more than climate. So she made a point today of talking about guaranteed basic income to help lift people out of poverty, her support for universal pharmacare. There's been some question, not a lot, right? But that's the comfort zone for her. So if she is to have an impact and if she's going to bleed votes away from the other so-called progressive parties, she has to have a platform that goes beyond climate change, no matter how important it is. And I agree with Marie. I think it is really going to be a top-of-mind issue, especially among younger voters.
But that's how they won opposition in PEI. They talked about issues of affordability. I mean, ironically, Elizabeth May is the most seasoned campaigner of the lot. So you have to think she's learned lessons. If she can't seize the opportunity now, which is that she has a accessible voter pool of nearly 50%, she's never going to be able to get it.
Okay, on that, we're going to take another commercial break, and that is it for our special online Q&A. The Power Panel is sticking around, though. Thanks to all of our viewers for your questions on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And stay tuned to those channels for more chances to ask your questions during the election. For those of you watching us on the old TV, stick with us. We're back for our final round right after this.